Welcome back to our podcast, and we're excited today to have Coffee with June with Norm Augustine, extremely famous fellow. Sip of coffee. And Norm is an aerospace businessman. He's also served with the government and the military. I first heard about him when I lived in California and my husband was a test pilot. Norm was a chief engineer for Douglas Aircraft Company. And then later I heard about him working with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Army, all kinds of exciting things. And after the Challenger accident, my husband was commander on that space shuttle. I went to Washington, D.C. at the request of President Bush and met with Tom Parnell, is that right? At Martin Marietta Corporation. And there was Norm as the vice president. And later on, he was the president and CEO. What was interesting to me after having met him is he chaired the advisory committee on the future of the U.S. space program. So he was an authority there with space as well as all this airplane. So it is aerospace business. When Lockheed Martin Corporation formed, he was the president and became the CEO. And I think later you'll tell us more about that. He also worked on the faculty at Princeton University. And if that wasn't enough, then he wrote this massive, wonderful book, Augustine's Laws, so popular that it's been in 7 editions and 5 or more languages. After all the wondrous work that he'd been doing, he wrote this hilarious book that seriously provides business leadership insights into lessons for managers of all walks of life. 53 chapters, and each of them has a highlight of a law that he calls a law. I want to learn more about that. But what was your reasoning behind creating this massive volume?
Well, June, let me start out by saying how good it is to be able to visit with you today. And as you described, our 2 histories go back a long way.
Yeah.
Some very bright spots and some not so bright spots, but I've always admired the things you've done. And as I say, I'm just very happy to have this chance to visit. Getting to your question, June, the book was never really intended to be a book. Over the years, as an aerospace engineer working mostly in business roles, I was often taken by strange things that were done that seemed like they didn't make sense. And I started putting together articles, and I would give speeches on some of these things, and I was asked to talk to groups. And I enjoyed doing that, but I had never really thought much about making a book, although my then teenage daughter kept saying, "Dad, you ought to take all your speeches and stuff and write a book." And I said, "Well, I don't have time to do that." And so I never really did much. Well, then one day I was on a business trip to San Diego, doing some work with the Navy. And when I got to San Diego, I had just checked into my hotel room. My side started to hurt fairly flagrantly. And so I finally decided I better do something about it. I got a cab driver and I said, "You got to find me a hospital. I think I have appendicitis." And anyway, he did. And so I had my appendix out that evening. And the next morning, my daughter packaged up all these old speeches and articles and says, "Here's your chance because you're not going to be doing anything for a while." And so during my recovery, I traded an appendix for a book. And I don't know if that was good, but that's what happened. And in terms of June, why I wrote it finally, one was I did have the time and it was getting some pressure from home. But one of the things I've learned along the way, and particularly from that book, is that you can say things, if you say them with humor, that people will listen to them and, believe it or not, take you seriously. Whereas if you say the same things without humor, they're offended, they get angry. And throughout my career, I've tried to take advantage of that you can get away with a lot. For example, our biggest customer where I was working at the time was the Defense Department, and yet I pointed out all kinds of crazy things that I thought the Defense Department was doing. And our bosses were very concerned. They wanted me to write the book with a pseudonym, but the publisher didn't want to do that. And anyway, I was able to say a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have said or wouldn't have gotten away with saying had it not been for the use of humor.
Well, it was very entertaining, and it surprised me that it was. My favorite part of the book is each chapter you have at the beginning, you have a little excerpt about Daedalus. You might want to tell our audience about Daedalus and Icarus, and then why you named that company, that fictional company, Daedalus.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. And I had all these speeches and stuff, but they were different topics. They didn't tie together as a book. And so I needed some kind of a thread to hang the chapters to. And so I came up with the idea of creating a fictional aerospace company created by two fictional young folks who just gotten out of business school. And they had experiences as their newly formed company began to develop and encounter challenges and successes and so on. And I had to have a name, of course, for it was originally the model plane, Daedalus Model Airplane Company. And I finally decided that would be a great story. And probably most people do know the story from Greek mythology that Icarus had gotten the idea of making wings out of sticky substance and bird feathers and so on. And he and his son decided, he made a set for his son, and they decided to fly to the sun, S-U-N. Yeah. And his son, Daedalus, got so excited about the whole thing, he got too close to the sun, and the wings melted, and the outcome was not good. And that was sort of the story of the fictional aerospace company that I created basically as a clothesline to hang my stories on.
Well, every chapter tells more about the growth or failings of the Daedalus company for airplanes, and I shouldn't give you a surprise ending, but they end up inventing an airplane that you can't see, that it's invisible. And these two college students meet up with every disastrous mistake that a manager can make. So there are lessons in that fictional story as well as in the lessons that you present. There are quotes. So many varied quotes. You quote Shakespeare. You quote college football coaches. You quote Yogi Berra, Churchill, Napoleon, Roosevelt. And one of my favorites is I just had to laugh out loud, is a section on discipline. And it was the managers. You said, the managers must have the discipline not to pull up the flowers just to see if the roots are okay. And I can imagine any part of an airplane where they're pulling up the flower to check on the tires or something. I don't know. But they were, can you think of any other of your humorous quotes?
Well, there are a lot of things in there. I got data. I should say that you didn't happen to mention it, but every chapter has data that behind the law. In other words, there's evidence. And I will confess that I took the liberty of extrapolating data an awful lot. And but my defense to that is I live in Washington, D.C., where economists here extrapolate based on one data point. And so if they can do that, I can extrapolate based on a few dozen data points, and I did. And and the kind of thing I looked at, for example, relates to what you just said, June, was I looked at the number of layers in various organizations, layers of management, and most Fortune 100 companies have around 12 layers of management, from the person at the bottom of the corporate structure to the CEO. And I found that most government, in the Defense Department anyway, from the lowest private to the Secretary of Defense, there were almost 40 layers. And so the law that came out of all this was that if enough layers of management are superimposed one on another, it can be assured that disaster won't be left to chance.
Yes.
So that was the kind of thing. And as I said, I had a lot of fun extrapolating, and some of my predictions have, ironically, I didn't really, I was extrapolating.
They've come true.
Jokingly, but some of them have come true. That I'm astounded that that's the case.
One of my other favorites that's close to home is a quote from Teddy Roosevelt. You said, "A person who spends himself in a worthy cause to seek high achievement may succeed or fail, but will not be a cold soul who knows neither victory nor defeat." And I've started many things, including these podcast levels, and they may be successful because of the people I'm interviewing, such as you, Norm Augustine, but also they may substitute me with somebody else who's better at this.
Well, there's a lot of quotes in there, some tongue in cheek, but most have a very serious lesson to apply. Churchill was always a favorite of mine. Yogi Berra, of course, can't be taught other than by Shakespeare. And I actually have a copy of my book of laws, and I don't remember how I happened to get it, but it was given to me it's my book of laws, but he signed it to me inside. And let's see, who was this? Somebody else that was a famous writer who gave me a signed copy of my book. And in it, he wrote, "If you'll promise to stay out of writing, I'll stay out of aerospace." So that was the sort of reaction that the book would get.
This is a picture of his book. And like I said, it's had all these editions and in 5 or 6 different languages. So it's extremely popular. What are you doing now? I mean, I know you're not just sitting around because you've always been involved in something. What's happening now?
Well, June, when I retired, I've taken this back a little ways here. I hope that's okay. But I've always wanted to teach, and I thought it was awfully important if I were to teach 8th grade algebra. I had a lot of math in college and graduate school, and most high schools, junior highs, the algebra teacher is the football coach who's been given a book and said, "Go teach." And it's not very inspiring. And I thought that algebra is such a turning point in the life of anyone who's interested in science or engineering. If you don't take algebra around 8th grade, you denied yourself the opportunity to ever become a scientist or engineer by and large. And so I thought a good thing to do when I left Lockheed Martin, where I was CEO at the time, chairman, that would be a good chance to uh, uh, go off and teach. And so I took early retirement a couple of years before I was required to, according to our company's rules. The company was doing very well. We'd just been through all the mergers and acquisitions, and that was behind us. And we had good people around the company to follow through. And so anyway, I took early retirement with the idea of teaching. And it turns out that in the state I live, as well as I now know in many other states, I'm not qualified to teach eighth grade algebra because I can't get into teachers union without having a teaching certificate.
Yep.
And so at that point, I started thinking, well, what am I going to do the rest of my runway here? And a couple of weeks after I learned this, I got a phone call from the dean of engineering at Princeton. And the dean said, Norm, I hear you want to teach. And I said, well, I really do, but I'm not qualified. And he said, well, would you consider joining the faculty at Princeton and teaching in the engineering school here? And so I said, I'd love to do that. And so that became my first undertaking after retiring. Another thing that came up that was unplanned, but this occupied most of my retirement, was I would get asked to look into a problem, mostly for the federal government, but also for state and local governments and a few for corporations. And I would be asked to look into an issue and put together a group, usually 10, 12 people, who were experts in the field. And we would put out a report on what happened and what needed to happen. And the fields I worked in were mostly not aerospace, and that's what I enjoyed so much. It was such a learning experience. And my role was to put together the group and make sure a report got out and to ask them questions and so on. I'm good at the latter. And that one thing led to another. And my secretary last year added up the number of commissions and committees I've chaired or co-chaired since I retired. And it's been 43 committees and commissions I've chaired or co-chaired. So in almost every field you can think of. And so that's sort of the way I've been spending retirement. All of it's been pro bono. I don't want to get caught up where I can't say what I think because I've got to get money for lunch tomorrow. So one of the great benefits was by working pro bono, one, it keeps the demand up, I've discovered, but the second is that you can say what you want. And so I've tried to do that. And it's almost always worked out either satisfactorily or extremely well, depending on the case.
Yes, I think so. Norm, where this podcast is being hosted by the Medal of Honor here in Chattanooga, the National Medal of Honor. And the characteristics of many of the Medal of Honor recipients are very much like your characteristics. You speak so frequently about integrity, the importance of integrity for your customers, integrity and teamwork, working with each other, and survival in so many different ways. But you're truly admirable. And I know that our listeners have enjoyed learning more about the lessons from a very famous aerospace engineer and aerospace businessman and engineer. But for the listeners, he holds 34 honorary degrees. I mean, he's doctor this and doctor that and everything. He was also selected by Who's Who and of America, and the Library of Congress is one of the most important 50 people in our country. Now, you've just listened to one of the most important of 50 people in our country whose character is is tremendous. And you want to learn from him. You want to listen to him because he is so honest about what he's doing and what the world needs. And we have been honored to have you today. Thank you, Norm. Any last things you want to say about those years?
June, just let me say it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for all the things you've done. And I'm very familiar with the Medal of Honor Association and all that you've accomplished and the remarkable people that's the highest award our military gives or our nation and for military service. And just a thank you to all the people who support that.
Okay. Until next time, Coffee with June. I'll see you. Bye-bye.